You know, I think I still have those shoes you were talking about that I wore when I got married.
How sentimental.
Yeah, well, you only get married once. In a while.
2 best friends, 3 kids, 1 Greenwich Village apartment, and about 100 secrets no one ever told you. From a real pregnancy disguised behind a fake broken leg to a spin-off yanked the night before its premiere, this beloved 80s sitcom was far stranger behind the camera than in front of it. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Kate and Allie. Fact 1, the show was born at a class reunion.
So do you miss me?
Yes, we miss you. We're all looking forward to having you back.
Most television shows begin with a writer sitting alone, staring at a blank page, trying to come up with something that feels real. But for Kate and Allie, the spark came from a much more ordinary place, a high school reunion. Sherry Coben, the creator of the series, attended one of those classic get-togethers where old classmates catch up, share stories, and reflect on how much their lives have changed. What she noticed at that reunion wasn't the success stories or the awkward small talk. It was the divorced women in the room. Specifically, she observed how those women naturally gravitated toward each other, how they found genuine comfort and strength in each other's company, and how that bond seemed to make their difficult situations feel a little more manageable. That observation stuck with her. She began thinking about what it would actually look like to build a life around that kind of friendship, not just as emotional support, but as a practical, everyday arrangement. What if 2 divorced women, each with kids of their own, decided to combine households and raise their families together? What would that look like week to week? What problems would come up? What would they laugh about? From that single real-world observation, Coben developed a concept that CBS picked up and turned into a show that ran for 6 full seasons, from 1984 to 1989. It won 2 Emmy Awards in its first season alone and became one of the more quietly influential comedies of the decade, one that treated divorced women as full, funny, capable human beings at a time when that was far from the norm on network television. All of that from one moment of paying attention at a class reunion. Fact 2, working title was 2 Mommies.
Wow. Yeah. Double pane thermal glass. I couldn't even get him to put up storms.
Before Kate and Allie became Kate and Allie, it almost went out into the world under a very different name, one that was arguably more on the nose, but considerably less catchy. The original test script for the series carried the working title, 2 Mommies. It was a straightforward description of the show's central premise. 2 mothers, both divorced, sharing a home, and raising their children together in New York City. There was nothing subtle about it, but it did communicate exactly what the show was about in 2 words. What's interesting is that Susan St. James, who would go on to play Kate McCardle, was reportedly comfortable with that title and enthusiastic about the project from early on. Part of her interest had to do with a very practical consideration. The show was being produced in New York City, which meant she wouldn't have to uproot her family and move to Los Angeles the way most television work required. That was a significant factor for her, and it made the 2 Mommies project appealing even before the title changed. CBS, however, had other ideas. The network apparently felt that naming the show after its 2 lead characters was a stronger choice, more personal, more inviting, and more likely to make audiences feel connected to the women at the center of the story. Naming a show after its characters was also a well-established formula for success in television comedy, so the shift made a certain amount of commercial sense. The title 2 Mommies was quietly dropped, and Kate and Allie moved forward with a name that turned out to be far more memorable. The show premiered in 1984, and the original working title was largely forgotten, until it occasionally resurfaced in interviews and production histories as a curious footnote. Fact 3. A CBS star married to an NBC boss.
You're kidding. Do I look like a person who's kidding? You know, that really doesn't prove anything.
Television networks have always been intensely competitive with one another, which makes the personal life of Susan St. James during the run of Kate and Allie all the more remarkable when you stop to think about it. While St. James was starring in one of CBS's most popular comedies, she was at the same time married to Dick Ebersol, who was one of the most powerful executives at NBC, CBS's direct rival. Ebersol had deep roots at the network and a long history in television production, and his professional identity was closely tied to NBC during this period. So the situation looked something like this. Every Monday night, millions of viewers tuned in to watch Susan St. James on CBS while her husband was working at the very network competing against that same broadcast. It was the kind of arrangement that sounds like it should have caused constant professional awkwardness, or at least a few uncomfortable dinner conversations. But by most accounts, the two managed to keep their personal and professional lives reasonably separate. What made it even more unusual was the visibility of both parties. St. James wasn't a minor supporting player. She was the co-lead of a hit show, receiving significant publicity and attention. And Ebersol wasn't a middle-level manager. He was a prominent figure in the industry whose decisions shaped NBC's programming in meaningful ways. It's worth noting that this kind of cross-network relationship was, and still is, genuinely rare in the television business. The industry tends to be insular and competitive, and the lines between rival networks are usually kept fairly firm. Having a major star and a network executive married to each other while working for competing broadcasters was the sort of thing that generated quiet industry conversation throughout the entire run of the series. Fact 4, Dick Ebersol left SNL to be a stay-at-home dad.
Scared
Of what?
of finding out that her idol is just a human being.
Not a very good one at that.
Dick Ebersol's connection to Kate and Allie goes beyond simply being married to one of its stars. It actually shaped a significant decision in his career at a moment when he was at the height of his professional influence. Before Kate and Allie came along, Ebersol had been one of the central figures in the resurrection of Saturday Night Live. After Lorne Michaels left the show following its 5th season in 1980, NBC eventually brought Ebersol in to take over as producer. He ran Saturday Night Live from 1981 through 1985, overseeing the show through a turbulent and transitional period that included the introduction of cast members like Eddie Murphy, who became a breakout star during those years. But when Kate and Allie took off and Susan St. James found herself with a hit series on her hands, the couple faced a logistical reality that a lot of dual-career families recognize. Someone needed to be home with the kids. Rather than letting that responsibility fall entirely on childcare staff or on his wife while she was working a demanding production schedule, Ebersol made the choice to step back from Saturday Night Live and take on a more active role at home. It was a decision that stood out precisely because of who was making it. This was not someone on the fringes of the television industry, quietly stepping away from a small project. Ebersol was one of the most recognized producers in American television, walking away from one of the most famous shows on the air, essentially to be a stay-at-home parent so his wife could pursue her career. The contrast between his professional stature and that domestic role was striking, and it remained one of the more unusual footnotes in the behind-the-scenes history of the show. Fact 5. Real pregnancy hidden behind a fake broken leg.
Excuse me, I'd never posted bail before. I assumed they would take American Express.
Television productions have been dealing with unexpected actor pregnancies for decades, and the solutions they come up with are often creative, awkward, or outright bizarre. The approach taken on Kate and Allie during Susan St. James's real-life pregnancy falls firmly into that tradition. St. James became pregnant during the production of the show's 4th season. Under normal circumstances on a different kind of series, a pregnancy might simply be written into the storyline. But Kate and Allie presented a specific problem. Her character, Kate McCardle, was single. There was no husband or long-term partner in the picture, and the writers felt that introducing a pregnancy for a single character would shift the tone of the show in ways that didn't fit the series they had built. So instead, the production leaned on the classic television toolkit for hiding a pregnancy. Strategic camera angles were used to keep St. James's midsection out of frame. Props were positioned in front of her during certain scenes. Costumes were adjusted to obscure as much as possible. And in at least one notable instance, the show explained her physical limitations on screen by having her character depicted as recovering from a broken leg. A fictional injury that conveniently justified why she wasn't moving around much. The one moment where the actual pregnancy did appear on screen in a more visible way was during a flashback episode, where the format of the scene allowed the writing staff to work around the continuity issue and let the real physical reality show through more naturally. It was a behind-the-scenes juggling act that audiences watching at home likely never noticed, which, from a production standpoint, was exactly the point. Fact 6. Censors demanded separate bedrooms every episode.
Chip's right, it's his anniversary too.
And take him with you and Mom.
I don't think he'd like the movie that Kate and I are going to see.
From its earliest episodes, Kate and Allie generated a certain amount of quiet anxiety among network executives and censors, not because of anything explicit in the scripts, but because of what some people thought the show might be implying. Two women living together, raising their children under one roof, relying on each other emotionally and practically. To some viewers and to some people within the network, this arrangement carried a suggestion that made certain higher-ups uncomfortable. Specifically, there was concern that audiences might interpret Kate and Allie's relationship as romantic, or that the show could be read as depicting a lesbian couple living together. The response from network pressure was notable in its specificity. Producers were reportedly instructed to include a moment at the end of each episode, or at least with enough regularity to be considered a pattern, in which Kate and Allie were clearly shown going to sleep in separate bedrooms. The visual was meant to function as an unambiguous signal to viewers that the two women were friends and housemates, not partners. This became something of an unofficial rule in the production, a nightly visual disclaimer built into the storytelling that was less about what the characters were doing and more about what the network needed audiences not to think they were doing. What makes this particularly interesting in retrospect is that the discomfort driving this instruction was never really about what was on screen. The show contained nothing that would have been considered inappropriate. The whole exercise was about managing viewer interpretation, which meant the writers and producers were being asked to craft their storytelling around an anxiety that existed entirely in the minds of network executives, rather than in the content of the show itself. Fact 7. That pressure inspired the lesbian Rent episode.
Some shoes resold. What's that?
Oh, fabric softener.
Oh.
Yeah.
Given all the behind-the-scenes anxiety about how audiences might perceive Kate and Allie's living arrangement, it's more than a little ironic that one of the show's most memorable episodes took that exact concern and turned it into a punchline. In the episode, Kate and Allie find themselves dealing with a significant rent increase on their Greenwich Village apartment. Facing the possibility of losing their home, they discover that their landlord is more willing to accommodate tenants in what he considers a stable, committed domestic situation. The two women decide to solve their housing problem by pretending to be a lesbian couple, leaning into the very interpretation that the network had been so anxious to disprove. The episode is widely discussed in television history as one of the more clever moments in the show's run, and its existence takes on an added layer of meaning when you know the backstory. The same network pressure that had producers writing separate bedroom scenes into episode after episode was, in a roundabout way, the cultural climate that made this kind of episode both possible and funny. The joke only works if the audience understands that people have been reading into Kate and Allie's friendship all along. It's the kind of creative decision that walks a careful line. The show wasn't making a political statement in the way that later television would. This was the mid-1980s, and network comedy had very defined limits. But by staging the premise as a deliberate comedic performance rather than an actual identity, the writers found a way to engage with the conversation that had been swirling around the show without crossing any lines that would have alarmed CBS. The episode remains one of the more discussed and analyzed entries in the entire series. Fact 8: an entire episode shot outdoors due to kidney stones.
But tomorrow is the first day of the rest of my life.
Television productions depend heavily on controlled environments. Studios are predictable. The lighting is set, the sound is managed, the sets are built to precise specifications, and the whole operation runs on a carefully maintained schedule. Shooting outdoors on the streets of New York City is essentially the opposite of all of that. So the fact that one 1987 episode of Kate and Allie was filmed almost entirely on location in Manhattan is unusual on its own. What makes the story behind it even stranger is the reason it happened. Susan St. James was hospitalized with kidney stones during production, which threw the episode's planned schedule into serious disruption. Rather than delay production entirely or restructure the episode around a different character, the writers and producers made an unexpected creative decision. They rewrote the episode to work around St. James's absence and moved the whole thing outside. The resulting episode centered on Jane Curtin's character, Allie, finding herself stranded on the streets of New York City after losing her keys and her money in a taxicab. The entire predicament was set outdoors, which meant the crew had to navigate actual Manhattan locations, manage ambient city noise, deal with unpredictable weather and pedestrian traffic, and essentially produce a television episode in one of the most logistically challenging filming environments imaginable. What added another layer to the episode was that it was produced in cooperation with the Coalition for the Homeless, giving the street-level story a connection to a real social issue that the show was using its platform to highlight. So what began as a production emergency born from a medical situation ended up being one of the more socially engaged episodes in the series, made entirely by accident because a kidney stone changed the plan. Fact 9: they shared a studio with Sesame Street.
To tell you something? Sure. Why should you be any different from anybody else?
When people think about where television shows are produced, Los Angeles tends to come to mind first. The big studio lots, the famous backlots, the warm California weather. Kate and Allie was a deliberate exception to that pattern, filmed entirely in New York City throughout its run. And one of the locations it used for production happened to come with a rather famous neighbor. The series was taped at Teletape Studios, located on West 81st Street in Manhattan. Teletape was a legitimate, fully equipped television production facility, capable of handling the kind of live audience, multi-camera sitcom format that Kate and Allie used. It was a practical and professional choice, but Teletape was also, at that same period of time, the production home of Sesame Street, one of the most iconic and longest-running children's television programs in American history. That means that on any given production day, the cast and crew of a CBS primetime sitcom were sharing the same building and the same facilities as the cast, crew, and Muppets of Sesame Street. The mental image of Jane Curtin and Susan St. James crossing paths in a hallway with Big Bird or the production team for Elmo is genuinely difficult to fully process. But that was apparently the reality of working at Teletape during this era. From a practical standpoint, this kind of studio sharing wasn't unusual. New York production facilities have always operated as multi-tenant spaces, hosting multiple productions simultaneously or in rotation. But the specific combination of shows sharing this particular building gave the Kate and Allie studio a peculiar distinction that most of the show's viewers would never have had any reason to know about. Fact 10: the theater was later given to David Letterman.
I love him more than that Cars for Kids song.
Teletape Studios on West 81st Street wasn't the only New York City location tied to Kate and Allie's production history. The show was also associated with the Ed Sullivan Theater, one of the most historically significant performance venues in the city, a building with a story that extends well beyond any single show that used it. The Ed Sullivan Theater, located on Broadway in Midtown Manhattan, had been a landmark since the 1940s and gained its most famous association through The Ed Sullivan Show, which ran for over 2 decades and became the program where American television audiences first watched the Beatles perform live. After Sullivan's show ended, the theater passed through various hands and uses over the years. Kate and Allie's connection to the theater placed it in the middle of an interesting chapter in the building's history. Following the show's run, the Ed Sullivan Theater went on to become the home of Late Show with David Letterman, which CBS launched in 1993 after Letterman moved from NBC. The Late Show would remain at the Ed Sullivan Theater for over 2 decades, making it one of the most recognizable locations in American late-night television. The connection between Kate and Allie and the Ed Sullivan Theater means the show was, in a sense, part of the building's story during a transitional period, before it became the stage most audiences would come to associate with Letterman and then with Stephen Colbert after him. For a show that was already notable for committing to New York City production at a time when most network comedies were based in Los Angeles, having this connection to such a storied Manhattan venue added one more layer to its unusual production history. Fact 11. One of only 2 primetime NYC sitcoms of the era.
Won't talk to you, huh?
No, looks like we're gonna be standing around here all day.
Kind of tough on the legs.
When Kate and Allie premiered on CBS in 1984, it was doing something that almost no other primetime network sitcom was doing at the time, producing a full weekly series complete with a live studio audience entirely in New York City. Hollywood had long been the center of gravity for American television production, and for good reason. The infrastructure was there: the studios, the sound stages, the technical crews, the casting pools, the post-production facilities. Moving a television production to the East Coast meant either building that infrastructure from scratch or making do with what was available, which was a genuine logistical challenge. Kate and Allie committed to New York not just as a setting, but as a production reality. The show was actually made there, on location, using New York facilities and New York crews. That level of commitment to filming in the city it was set in was relatively uncommon in network television at the time. What makes this even more striking is that during the same period, the other major primetime sitcom being produced in New York City was The Cosby Show, which premiered the same year on NBC. 2 of the biggest comedies of the mid-1980s were both being made in New York simultaneously. And both, not coincidentally, were shows with strong creative identities tied to the city they depicted. For television historians, the pairing of Kate and Allie and The Cosby Show as the 2 flagship New York-produced sitcoms of the era is more than just a curiosity. It reflects a brief and unusual moment when 2 major networks each had a hit show that had deliberately stepped outside the Hollywood production model. And both of those shows became some of the most watched television of their decade. Fact 12. The theme song is named after a Paris subway stop.
Oh, just a little secret I learned from Vanna White.
There is something quietly amusing about the fact that the theme song to a New York City sitcom, a show that went out of its way to actually film in New York, that celebrated Greenwich Village as a setting, and that was practically an advertisement for Manhattan living, was named after a stop on the Paris Metro. The instrumental theme music for Kate and Allie was composed by a musician named Adam Fine, and the piece was titled After Châtelet, which is pronounced roughly as Châtelet, and serves as one of the major transit hubs in central Paris. It's a busy, well-known station in the French capital, connecting multiple metro lines beneath the heart of the city. Why a Paris subway station ended up as the title of a theme song for an American sitcom set in New York is not entirely clear from the historical record, and the connection between the 2 things is never explained anywhere in the show itself. The theme played instrumentally over the opening title sequence, which featured images of New York City, including, in a detail that makes the whole thing even more cheerfully contradictory, a shot of the Empire State Building. So viewers were watching images of one of New York's most iconic landmarks while listening to music named after a transit stop in France. For the millions of American viewers who watched Kate and Allie throughout its run, this geographic disconnect was completely invisible. The music became familiar and recognizable on its own terms, associated entirely with the show and with the two characters at its center. The Parisian naming of the piece was simply a private detail that lived in production paperwork until people started looking into the show's history and pulled it out into the light. Fact 13. Ari Myers left mid-season, but stayed in the credits.
Okay. The Washington
Dodgers.
One of the more quietly strange details in Kate and Allie's production history has to do with a young cast member, a prestigious university, and the peculiar time delay between real-world events and what television audiences actually see on screen. Ari Myers played Emma McCardle, the daughter of Susan St. James's character Kate, throughout the run of the series. She was a regular presence in the show from its beginning and had become a familiar face to the show's audience by the time the 5th season arrived. Partway through that 5th season, Myers made the decision to leave the show in order to attend Yale University. It was a personal and academic choice that took her off the production, and the show adjusted its storylines accordingly as her character was written out or reduced in her absence. But here is where it gets strange. Even after Myers had physically left the production and was no longer appearing in new episodes, her name continued to appear in the opening credits of Kate and Allie, not for just an episode or two while the transition was being handled, but through the remainder of that season. This meant that audiences watching the show week after week were seeing Ari Myers listed as part of the cast in the credits, while the actress herself was somewhere on the Yale University campus attending classes. The credit roll had become a kind of ghost, a record of a cast that no longer existed in the form being advertised. Credits in television production are governed by contracts and agreements that don't always align neatly with on-screen reality, which is part of how this situation happened. But the effect for viewers was a quiet, low-key mismatch between what they were being told and what they were actually watching. Fact 14. One spinoff was canceled the day before its premiere.
While you were figuring it out, I had another thought.
Allie, if this is about the local litterer, forget it.
Most television spin-offs that get canceled do so before they ever reach the screen. A pilot doesn't get picked up, a concept doesn't test well, and the whole project quietly disappears into development history. What happened with the proposed Kate and Allie spin-off was different and considerably more dramatic. The spin-off, titled Late Bloomers, was developed using a format sometimes called a backdoor pilot, meaning that instead of producing a separate pilot episode, the spin-off's concept was introduced within an episode of the existing show. The Kate and Allie episode that served this function featured Lindsay Wagner as a guest star, essentially setting up the characters and premise that would carry over into the new series. CBS apparently liked what they saw well enough to schedule Late Bloomers for an actual premiere date. January 19th, 1987. That was a real announced air date on a real network, which meant television listings had been printed, promotional materials had presumably been prepared, and anyone paying attention to the CBS schedule at that time would have been expecting a new show to appear that night. It didn't. The spin-off was canceled the day before it was supposed to premiere. With less than 24 hours to go before the debut, CBS pulled the plug on Late Bloomers entirely. The time slot that had been reserved for the premiere of a brand new series was filled that evening with a rerun, specifically a rerun of the Kate and Allie backdoor pilot episode that had been used to introduce the spin-off in the first place. So the same episode that was supposed to launch a new show instead aired again as a replacement for the show. It had failed to launch. Fact 15. The same producer killed 2 shows by marrying off the lead.
Collector's item.
Then why can't I?
Because I don't want you spending your good money on a book of greasy glandular.
Television has a long history of creative decisions that, in hindsight, seem like obvious mistakes. Choices that made sense at the time, but ended up undermining the very thing that made a show successful in the first place. The story of producer Bernie Orenstein and his association with 2 separate but strikingly similar creative missteps is one of the more unusual examples of that pattern. Orenstein was a veteran television producer with a long career, and one of his earlier major projects was That Girl, the groundbreaking 1960s and early 70s series starring Marlo Thomas as Anne Marie, a young single woman pursuing her dreams in New York City. That Girl was significant for its time because of how it depicted an independent woman living on her own terms, without the story being centered on her domestic or marital life. When That Girl came to the end of its run, the production made a decision that Orenstein later expressed genuine regret about. They concluded the series by having Anne Marie's character get engaged and married. In his later reflections, Orenstein suggested that this choice fundamentally undercut what had made the show compelling, that the appeal of Anne Marie was precisely her independence, and ending her story with marriage resolved a tension the show had been built on. Years later, Orenstein was involved with Kate and Allie, and the same decision was made again. The character of Allie, played by Jane Curtin, was given a marriage storyline in the later seasons of the show. The narrative shifted accordingly, and the show's dynamic changed in ways that many observers felt contributed to its declining momentum in its final years. Orenstein apparently recognized after the fact that he had repeated the same creative mistake twice, on 2 different shows, decades apart, each time changing the thing the audience had originally fallen in love with.